Hi, welcome to another episode of Patents TV. Today I have Julie Kuhn here. She's our Northeast coordinator, and she's here to tell us about a UDL lesson plan with some of the materials that come with it.
Well, hi Jenna, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you.
Glad to be back. What I'm going to talk about is a theme, access to the curriculum. I've been working on this all year long, and today I've called it Schmarriers, a universally designed lesson plan. So first I want to show you a few slides before we get into the fun hands-on stuff. Part of it is understanding what Patents is, promoting achievement through technology and instruction for all students. And this is critically important for teachers and for schools to understand because we really are talking about all students having access to the curriculum. That's easier said than done, and that is because these are the students we face. We have classrooms full of diversity, and there's a big emphasis on student achievement. All students really do need to take some kind of state test. So how do we accomplish that, show achievement, deal with the diversity, and still meet the needs of all the students in the classroom? Well, we have some tools at our hands. Assistive technology is one way for special needs students. Instructional technology is available for all students. And then there's universal design for learning, which is a way of designing curriculum to meet the needs of all students. And these are supposedly actively engaged students with a happy teacher doing a science project. Okay, here are some students that we would often typically think would not be able to participate in a general ed curriculum. They're rather physically handicapped and requiring specialized equipment. In my view, in both of these pictures, they are as equally engaged in both sets of pictures. So when we're talking about universal design for learning, we really are talking about multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression. This is a great opportunity to say this, when you hear someone say the student can't because, say, okay, let's talk about those barriers. In the case of universal design for learning, when teachers provide multiple means of student engagement, that means students have choices, and that can lead to active interest. When teachers provide multiple means of representation, students have options, how they receive the content, how they can, their style can be adjusted, and then multiple means of action and expression. Those are the opportunities for how students can demonstrate learning. So back to this slide, not a whole lot of any of that is going on. So therefore, nobody is really getting a very good multiple means of anything. So moving on, what we really want ultimately is that we have purposeful, motivated, resourceful, knowledgeable, strategic, and goal-directed learners. So the curriculum as we typically get it is disabled essentially because who they can teach, it's not very flexible. In what it teaches, it's very flat, just in a standard book. And how it teaches, that's totally up to a teacher to modify and adjust. So we need to change that. So how do you do that? By access. In this case, if a student were to describe, if you wanted a student to describe this picture, how would all students describe it? And so they need a variety of means of doing so. And for example, hot, I'm afraid, be careful fireman, 3 men, blue, orange. There's so many descriptors here. And lots of times a typical communication system won't allow that. For example, drink, I'm having fun, parents, friend, have a nice day, eat. Those are things that may not fully express the needs of and desires of this child at this moment. In addition, these are not typically things found on standardized testing. So that's what we need to keep in mind when we're talking about universal design for learning and lesson planning and purposeful and front loading. So we predict, we front load, we plan, we collaborate, we share, and the moment you've been waiting for, here's the lesson plan as seen through the lens of a UDL perspective. We have the curriculum, unit, and methods. And it's going to be a little bit different than a typical lesson plan in my example today, just for simplicity's sake. We have in this case, it's learn the names and order and sizes of the planets. And a student would fill in the names of the planets in the corresponding rectangle. The idea is, first you would talk about barriers. Why can't those children in the wheelchair access this kind of a worksheet? And then how would you make it available to kids with some solutions? So oftentimes we would talk about this in a group. How would you engage a student? What are multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression? So I'm going to show you what some of those things are now with our next section. But the neat thing about this approach is you look at your curriculum. You don't have to invent a new curriculum or come up or purchase something different. You look at the curriculum you're working with. You look at the barriers, say, okay, we've got this set of things to work with. What are the barriers given the kids that I have in my class or the kids that might come into my class? General ed, special ed, gifted, or challenged. And then we write that down and figure out some ways to help them out. This is the hands-on part that I wanted to show you about UDL and lesson plans and how to include all kids. So we know how to handle pencil and paper. We know how to handle some basic computers for all learners. We know how books work. And many of us understand that you can also read from the computer. You can listen to the computer. You can do alternative ways of accessing a computer with most kids. And that's not really this part of the conversation, although that is a part of UDL and giving access to the curriculum for all learners. But in this case, given the picture you saw of those kids standing around the science teacher, happily watching him do all the work, or the kids sitting in the wheelchairs just outside enjoying the sun, but basically they were all equally engaged and participatory and receiving the same kind of knowledge, and all of that was pretty minimal in both of those examples. So this is a way to include all learners. This is a random alternate spinner. So our student who may not be verbal, may not be able to function physically like other students, can still participate in the general ed activity by activating the button or the switch to make this go around, randomly selecting a planet for a general ed student or another student to say, oh, this is Earth, and then whatever the requirement is for that assignment for that other student or students. And then they carry on, and it goes, and it's great. They're all engaged. That's my science connection. So instead of filling out that worksheet that we've seen, this could be another way to participate. Here's a heart activity, same kind of idea. So really, you're only limited by your imagination. Now, here is something called, this is a communication system. You're limited by how many of these you can access at any time. There are 5 levels here, but let's listen to this one.
I'm ready to work.
The student is ready to work. So instead of just passively putting something in front of a student and saying, push the button, which makes no sense to anyone for any purpose, I would say something like, I would say find Venus, or what's next, because it's random, we don't know. The student would say, I'm ready to work. Then an adult or a peer would say, great, find what's next. Then this will work. And then they find Saturn. And then the student says, thanks. And then who's next? And then
I don't understand.
Then you respond to that. You always respond to the initiation. So instead of kids being passive listeners and responders and noun namers, we actually have this reciprocal thing going back and forth. Here's something about the state facts: capital, agriculture, size, industry, etc. So you're really limitless. Here's a way to engage kids in reading a book. This happens to be Eric Carle's Brown Bear, Brown Bear. But instead of just listening to it, and this is a normal book kids read, when it's time to say white dog, you could put this on a talking communication device, and it would say, white dog, what do you see? And then as a reward, the student could also have the white dog moving. So again, it's learning turn taking, patience and waiting and interaction. Let's see, here's some overlays that could be used and programmed for mountain, ice, snow, swamp. So even a student who's higher functioning but a little stage fright, or let's just say doesn't talk out loud at all, but you want to know what they know, there's another way to demonstrate the knowledge base. Okay, ooh, we missed this one. Would you hold that one up?
Sure.
This is really cool. This is a basic communication device. It will in no way help any student pass any test on a standardized test. It says, I'm fine, how are you, I need help, let's play ball, no, yes, it's my turn, it's your turn, good job. So that's a good social skill overlay or communication board, but we put it on here so that when a child is swimming in the water, they can hang on to that and let somebody know that they need help. I mean, they're shriveling up, they need to get out of there. Or it's their turn to do whatever, or they want to go get that basketball that's floating in the water. Whatever floats in the water. So that's a way, you always have a way for a student to be participating in the activity in the curriculum. And then here's another way. Here's a device, an overlay that you match, and the student can learn what they're doing that way. It could be matched up with exactly what the assignment is for the students. It could be a book. It could be a core communication so that they really are learning those descriptor words. And then this is an alternative keyboard. So a student who just needs a different way to physically access a computer can actually use this kind of a keyboard. Or this one, or this one. Okay, there's your brown bear story and your green frog, green frog. So those are some indications of what I wanted to show you, and you would write those in as alternatives, as different ways to engage, to provide representation, and to provide engagement and activities for a student to participate in the general ed curriculum.
All right, thank you so much for showing us all these awesome materials for UDL, for these communication technologies and devices. We appreciate that.
Thanks.
And don't miss us at the Tech Expo coming up in just a couple weeks, April 14th. You'll get to see other augmentative communication technologies along with myriad devices and such. So we'll see you then. Thanks for viewing Patents TV. See you next time.